The elevator music played its mechanical tune as I stood frozen, watching the numbers climb. Floor 12. Floor 13. Floor 14. Each ding felt like a countdown to another day of humiliation. My hands gripped the portfolio tighter, knuckles white against the black leather. Inside were 12 campaign concepts I'd spent the weekend perfecting, each one crafted with the kind of detail that kept me awake until 3 a.m. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The doors slid open to reveal the familiar chaos of Morrison & Associates, Chicago's third-largest advertising agency. The scent of expensive coffee mixed with stress sweat hit me immediately. I walked past the glass-walled conference rooms where senior executives gestured dramatically at mood boards, past the creative department where art directors hunched over dual monitors, past the reception desk where Emma always gave me that sympathetic smile that somehow made everything worse. Jackson, came the voice I'd been dreading. Sharp. Cutting. Like broken glass wrapped in designer fabric, Victoria Blackwood stood in the doorway of her corner office, arms crossed, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a bun so tight it could have been architectural. She wore her usual armor, a charcoal Armani suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, paired with those red-soled heels that clicked against the marble floors like a countdown timer. "You're 3 minutes late," she said, checking her Apple Watch with the kind of theatrical precision that suggested she'd been timing me. Pathetic, as usual. I glanced at my phone. 8:57 a.m. My start time was 9 o'clock. "Actually, Victoria, I'm 3 minutes early, don't." She held up one perfectly manicured finger. "Just don't. Your little portfolio presentation was supposed to be ready yesterday. But instead of excellence, you've delivered delay. Again." The word pathetic hung in the air like smoke. It was her favorite word for me, deployed with surgical precision at least twice a day. In meetings, Jackson's ideas are pathetic. In emails CC'd to the entire team, this pathetic attempt at strategy needs immediate revision. In the break room, loud enough for everyone to hear, how pathetic that someone with a master's degree can't grasp basic market positioning. I followed her into the office, a shrine to everything Victoria Blackwood believed herself to be. Awards lined the shelves, each one bearing her name in gold lettering. The wall behind her desk showcased campaign posters from her glory days at Sterling Communications in New York, back when she was actually creating instead of just criticizing. And there, prominently displayed on her credenza, was a framed article from Adweek titled, "The 40 Under 40, Advertising's Rising Stars." Victoria's photo smiled back from the page, taken 3 years ago when she was 38 and still believed her own hype, but what dominated the office wasn't any of that. It was the vision board she'd created 6 months ago, a collage of magazine clippings and printed emails that represented her ultimate goal: creative director at Pinnacle Media Group, New York's most prestigious advertising firm. The position had been her obsession ever since the current director announced his retirement. She'd mentioned it in every team meeting, every client call, every casual conversation by the coffee machine. "Your concepts," she said, settling behind her desk like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "Show me what pathetic looks like today." I opened the portfolio and began spreading the campaign boards across her glass desktop. 12 different approaches for our biggest client, Meridian Bank, each targeting a different demographic with precision-crafted messaging. The first concept played with financial anxiety, using dark humor to address millennial banking fears. The second embraced generational wealth building with aspirational imagery. The third focused on digital native behaviors with interactive elements. Victoria's eyes scanned the work with the kind of attention that felt more like an autopsy than a review. She picked up the first board, held it at arm's length, and made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a snort. "This is your solution?" she asked, waving the concept in the air. "Fear-based marketing for millennials? How original. How groundbreaking. How absolutely pathetic." She moved to the next board. "And this one? Wealth building for young professionals. Did you copy this from a Wells Fargo campaign from 2019? Because that's what it looks like. Derivative. Uninspired. Pathetic." Each critique landed like a physical blow. Not because Victoria was wrong, she rarely was about creative shortcomings, but because she delivered her assessments with a cruelty that went beyond professional feedback. She didn't just identify problems, she made them personal. She didn't just critique work, she attacked worth. "The interactive concept shows promise," she continued, her tone suggesting she was about to crush that hope. "But the execution is amateur. The user journey is confusing. The call to action placement is pathetic. Did you even test this flow, or did you just assume users would intuitively understand your scattered thinking?" I watched her demolish 6 months of research and development in under 10 minutes. Every late night, every focus group session, every iteration and refinement reduced to a single word: pathetic. Here's what's going to happen, Victoria said, gathering the boards into a neat stack. You're going to start over. Fresh concepts. Better strategy. Less pathetic execution. I need 12 new directions by Thursday. Thursday? That's 3 days. Are you questioning my timeline, Jackson? The way she said my name made it sound like a disease. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never noticed before. Behind the cruelty, behind the perfectly applied makeup and designer clothes, Victoria Blackwood was afraid. Afraid that someone might discover she hadn't created anything meaningful in years. Afraid that her reputation was built on past accomplishments and present politics rather than current talent. Afraid that somewhere in this building was someone who might be better than her. No, I said quietly. I'll have them ready. Good. And Jackson? She smiled, but it was the kind of smile sharks might recognize. Try not to be completely pathetic this time. I gathered my rejected work and walked back to my cubicle, past the curious glances of colleagues who'd heard every word through the thin office walls. My desk sat in the middle of the creative department, surrounded by the subtle energy of people trying very hard to look busy. Everyone knew about Victoria's treatment of me. Everyone had witnessed the daily humiliations. And everyone had chosen silence over solidarity, afraid that standing up for me might redirect her cruelty toward them. But what Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment my entire career. Every insult, every dismissal, every time she'd called my work pathetic, I'd been quietly building something she couldn't see, a portfolio of real innovation, hidden from her view, tested in markets she didn't even know existed. It started 2 years ago, not long after I'd joined Morrison & Associates. I was fresh out of Northwestern with an MBA in marketing and a head full of theories about consumer psychology and brand storytelling. I thought I was ready to revolutionize advertising. I thought my ideas would speak for themselves. I thought talent would be recognized and rewarded. I was pathetically naive. My first campaign proposal at Morrison & Associates was for a local restaurant chain called Mama Rosa's. They wanted to expand from 3 locations to 20 within 2 years, targeting young families and food-conscious professionals. I spent 3 weeks researching demographic patterns, analyzing social media behavior, studying successful restaurant expansion campaigns from the past decade. My concept was simple: instead of traditional food photography and generic family messaging, we'd create a documentary-style campaign following real customers as they introduced Mama Rosa's to their friends and family. Authentic stories. Real emotions. Genuine recommendations captured in beautiful, unscripted moments. Victoria took one look at the presentation and laughed. Actually laughed. Documentary style for a pizza chain, she said, loud enough for the entire creative team to hear. Jackson, this isn't the Sundance Film Festival. This is advertising. We sell food, not feelings. This approach is completely pathetic. She assigned the account to Bradley Morrison, the founder's nephew, who created a campaign featuring stock photos of attractive families sharing perfectly arranged meals under soft studio lighting. Generic tagline: Mama Rosa's, where family begins. Uninspired music. Predictable messaging. Safe. Boring. Exactly what Victoria considered professional. The campaign failed spectacularly. Mama Rosa's opened 2 new locations instead of 20. Within 6 months, they'd switched to a competitor agency, but here's what nobody knew: I hadn't given up on my concept. I'd simplified it, refined it, and pitched it directly to smaller restaurants around Chicago. Not for money, I couldn't risk Victoria discovering moonlighting activities, but for the chance to prove the approach worked. I partnered with Tony's Authentic Italian, a struggling family restaurant in Lincoln Park. The owner, Maria Castellano, was weeks away from closing. She had no budget for traditional advertising, but she was desperate enough to try anything. I offered to create and execute my documentary concept for free, asking only for permission to use the results in my portfolio. We spent 2 weekends filming real customers, real conversations, real moments of discovery as people tasted Maria's grandmother's recipes for the first time. No scripts. No actors. Just authentic reactions to exceptional food. I edited the footage into 3 30-second spots and helped Maria by minimal social media placement. Within a month, Tony's Authentic Italian had a waiting list for weekend reservations. Within 3 months, Maria was considering expansion. The documentary-style approach that Victoria had called pathetic was generating results that traditional advertising couldn't match. I quietly replicated the strategy with 4 more small businesses around the city. A boutique bookstore that needed to compete with online retailers. A vintage clothing shop trying to attract younger customers. A coffee roastery launching a subscription service. Each time, the authentic storytelling approach outperformed conventional campaigns by margins that would have impressed even Victoria. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. But I never told her. I never showed her the results. I never mentioned the growing portfolio of successful campaigns I was building outside Morrison and Associates. Because I knew she would find a way to take credit, or worse, find a way to shut it down. Instead, I let her continue calling my work pathetic while I quietly proved it wasn't. The breaking point came 6 months later, during the quarterly review process. Victoria had assigned me the preliminary research for Meridian Bank, our largest client, with strict instructions to try not to embarrass the agency. It was busy work, really, demographic analysis and competitive research that any intern could have completed. But I saw it as an opportunity to demonstrate value. I spent 2 months diving deeper than anyone expected. I analyzed 5 years of customer data, identified patterns in banking behavior that Meridian's own research team had missed, and developed insights about financial anxiety among different generations that challenged conventional wisdom about consumer banking. My research revealed that millennials weren't avoiding banks because they distrusted financial institutions, they were avoiding banks because traditional marketing made them feel stupid. Every campaign used language that assumed financial literacy. Every message implied that smart people already understood banking concepts. The advertising was designed to appeal to customers who were already confident in their financial knowledge, but my data showed something different. The most valuable long-term customers were people who started their banking relationships feeling uncertain and gradually built confidence through positive experiences. They didn't want to be told they were smart. They wanted to be made to feel smart. This insight could revolutionize how Meridian approached customer acquisition and retention. Instead of marketing to financial confidence, we could market to financial curiosity. Instead of assuming knowledge, we could celebrate learning. Instead of intimidating potential customers with expertise, we could invite them into expertise. I compiled my findings into a comprehensive presentation, complete with data visualizations, demographic breakdowns, and strategic recommendations. It was the kind of research that typically took consulting firms months to produce. I was proud of it. I believed it could change how our agency approached financial services marketing. Victoria scheduled 15 minutes to review my work. Interesting data points, she said, flipping through the presentation with the speed of someone scanning a restaurant menu. But your conclusions are naive. Banks don't want uncertain customers. They want confident customers who make larger deposits and take bigger loans. This psychological approach is too academic, too theoretical, too pathetic for practical application. She closed the presentation and handed it back to me. Stick to the demographic basics for the final report. Leave the strategy to people who understand business. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a consumer psychology professor at Northwestern who'd been my thesis advisor. I asked if she'd be interested in collaborating on a research study about financial marketing and consumer confidence. Not for Morrison and Associates. Not for Meridian Bank. For academic publication. Dr. Chen was intrigued. We spent 4 months conducting surveys, focus groups, and behavioral studies with over 500 participants across different age groups and income levels. Our research confirmed what my original analysis had suggested: consumers responded more positively to financial marketing that acknowledged uncertainty rather than assumed confidence. We published our findings in the Journal of Consumer Psychology under the title, From Intimidation to Invitation, Reframing Financial Services Marketing for Anxious Consumers. The article gained attention in academic circles, was cited by other researchers, and eventually caught the attention of someone I never expected, David Holloway, creative director at Pinnacle Media Group. David reached out through LinkedIn, mentioning that he'd read our research and was impressed by the practical applications for advertising strategy. He wondered if I might be interested in discussing opportunities at Pinnacle. The same position Victoria had been coveting for months, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I used David's interest as motivation to expand my outside portfolio. I began reaching out to mid-sized businesses that were struggling with customer acquisition, offering research-based campaign strategies in exchange for case study permissions. I worked nights and weekends, building a collection of campaigns that demonstrated my ability to identify consumer insights and translate them into effective marketing. A financial planning firm that increased new client acquisition by 180% using messaging that celebrated financial learning rather than financial achievement. A community bank that grew deposits by 45% by repositioning uncertainty as opportunity. A credit union that doubled membership by making financial services feel accessible rather than exclusive. Each success proved that my approach, the one Victoria, consistently called pathetic, could deliver results that traditional advertising couldn't match. I documented everything: strategy development, execution details, performance metrics, client testimonials. I built a portfolio that told a story about understanding consumers in ways that conventional wisdom missed. Meanwhile, at Morrison and Associates, I continued enduring Victoria's daily humiliations while quietly preparing for the moment when her cruelty would finally work against her. That moment came on a Tuesday morning in October. During what was supposed to be a routine client presentation, Meridian Bank had requested a campaign refresh targeting millennial customers, and Victoria had assigned me to handle the preliminary concepts while the real strategists developed the actual campaign. It was another busy work assignment, designed to keep me occupied while more senior team members created the presentation that would actually be shown to the client. But something had changed in Meridian's marketing department. They'd hired a new CMO, Jessica Martinez, who had an MBA from Wharton and a reputation for data-driven decision-making. Jessica had spent her first month reviewing previous campaigns and was concerned about Meridian's declining market share among younger demographics. Instead of accepting Morrison and Associates' traditional approach, Jessica requested to see all preliminary concepts, including the research and strategic thinking behind each direction. She wanted to understand not just what we were proposing, but why we believed it would work. Victoria was furious. Client presentations were supposed to follow established protocols. Senior strategists present polished concepts supported by demographic basics and competitive analysis. Clients weren't supposed to see the messy preliminary work or question the strategic assumptions. They were supposed to trust the agency's expertise and approve the recommended direction, but Jessica Martinez wasn't interested in trusting expertise. She wanted to see evidence. "Fine," Victoria said, calling me into her office 2 days before the presentation. "Since the client wants to see preliminary work, you'll present your pathetic concepts to Meridian. Consider it a learning experience in how real clients react to amateur strategy." She was setting me up for public failure. A chance to demonstrate, in front of our biggest client, why my approach was pathetic and why her traditional methods were superior. She expected Jessica Martinez to dismiss my research-based concepts in favor of conventional financial services marketing. Victoria had no idea what she'd just unleashed. I spent the next 48 hours preparing a presentation that would either end my career at Morrison and Associates or transform it entirely. Instead of showing just the 12 campaign concepts Victoria had requested, I presented the complete strategic framework that had emerged from my research: why traditional financial marketing was failing with millennial consumers, how uncertainty-based messaging could build stronger customer relationships, and what data-driven personalization might look like in the banking industry. I included case studies from my outside portfolio, carefully anonymized to avoid revealing my moonlighting activities, that demonstrated how the approach had worked for other financial services clients. I showed behavioral research that supported the strategy. I presented customer journey mapping that illustrated how uncertainty-based marketing could improve long-term retention. It was the presentation I'd been building toward for 2 years. Every insult from Victoria, every dismissal of my ideas, every time she'd called my work pathetic had contributed to this moment. The conference room was packed. Victoria sat at the head of the table, confident in her expectation of my failure. Bradley Morrison represented the agency's traditional approach. 3 account managers prepared to manage client expectations after my anticipated disaster. Jessica Martinez entered with 2 colleagues, a data analyst and a behavioral researcher. They weren't just there to approve a campaign. They were there to evaluate Morrison and Associates' capacity for strategic innovation. I began presenting. For the first 10 minutes, Victoria's expression remained smugly confident. My research-based approach was exactly the kind of theoretical nonsense she'd been criticizing for months. The client would see through it immediately. But Jessica Martinez was taking notes. Detailed notes. Her colleagues were exchanging meaningful glances and pointing at specific data points in my presentation. When I reached the case studies demonstrating successful implementation of uncertainty-based messaging, Jessica interrupted with questions. "This community bank case study," she said, pointing at one of my slides. "You show 45% growth in deposits over 6 months. What were the specific messaging strategies that drove those results?" I walked through the campaign development process, explaining how we'd identified language patterns that made potential customers feel welcomed rather than intimidated. How we'd tested different approaches to financial education. How we'd measured confidence building alongside traditional conversion metrics. "And this retention data," Jessica continued. "You're showing that customers acquired through uncertainty-based marketing have lower churn rates than those acquired through confidence-based marketing. Can you explain the psychological mechanism behind that pattern?" For 30 minutes, Jessica and her team peppered me with questions that demonstrated they understood exactly what I was proposing and why it mattered. They weren't just interested in pretty campaign concepts. They wanted to understand the strategic thinking, the research methodology, the measurable outcomes. Victoria's confidence began to crack around the 20-minute mark. This wasn't going according to plan. The client wasn't dismissing my approach as pathetic academic theory. They were engaging with it as legitimate strategic innovation. When I finished presenting, Jessica Martinez sat back in her chair and looked around the room. "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we've been looking for," she said. "We've been working with agencies that assume millennial banking behavior without really understanding it. This research-based approach addresses patterns we've been seeing in our own customer data but haven't known how to address strategically." She turned to Victoria. "We'd like to move forward with developing campaigns based on this framework. When can you have fully developed concepts ready for review?" Victoria's face had gone through several color changes during the presentation, settling on a shade that suggested internal combustion. She cleared her throat and attempted to regain control of the situation. "Of course, we're pleased that Jackson's preliminary research resonated with your team," she said, emphasizing preliminary like it meant irrelevant. "Our senior strategists will now develop professional-grade campaigns that leverage these insights in commercially viable ways." "Actually," Jessica said, "I'd prefer to work directly with Jackson on this project. The strategic thinking here is too sophisticated to risk losing in translation." The room fell silent. Victoria's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Bradley." Morrison stared at his notepad. "The account managers suddenly found their phones very interesting," Jessica continued. "We'd also like to discuss expanding this research approach to other demographic segments. Have you considered applying a similar methodology to Gen X banking anxiety or boomer financial transition concerns?" I had. I'd been researching both demographics in my spare time, building frameworks that addressed the specific psychological barriers each generation faced when making financial decisions. But I'd never mentioned this research to Victoria because I knew she'd find a way to crush it. "I've done some preliminary work in both areas," I said carefully. "The patterns are different for each generation, but the underlying principle holds. Financial marketing works better when it acknowledges uncertainty rather than assumes confidence." Jessica's eyes lit up. "We need to see that research. This could reshape our entire customer acquisition strategy." After the meeting, I walked back to my cubicle in a daze. Colleagues who'd witnessed my usual humiliation stared openly as I passed. Victoria had disappeared into her office and closed the door, which was never a good sign, but I knew something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time since joining Morrison and Associates, my ideas hadn't been dismissed as pathetic. They'd been recognized as valuable. More than valuable, they'd been seen as exactly what the client needed. That evening, my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn message from David Holloway at Pinnacle Media Group. "Heard through industry channels that you knocked it out of the park with Meridian Bank today. Would love to schedule a call to discuss the creative director position we talked about months ago. Are you ready to consider a move to New York?" I stared at the message for a long time. The creative director position at Pinnacle Media Group. Victoria's dream job. The role she'd been coveting and scheming toward for over a year. Being offered to me, but I wasn't ready to leave Morrison and Associates. Not yet. Not while Victoria still had the power to call someone else's work pathetic. Not while there were other people in the building who might benefit from seeing what happened when pathetic ideas turned out to be innovative strategies. I typed back, "Let me finish a few projects here first. Can we revisit this conversation in 2 months?" David responded immediately, "Absolutely. The position isn't going anywhere, and frankly, what you're building at Morrison and Associates is impressive enough that we want to see where it leads." Over the next 6 weeks, I threw myself into developing the Meridian Bank campaign with an energy I'd never brought to agency work before. For the first time, I was working on a project where my strategic approach was valued rather than tolerated. Jessica Martinez and her team were collaborative partners rather than skeptical judges. Every insight was explored rather than dismissed. Every creative direction was supported by research rather than intuition. The campaign we developed together was unlike anything Morrison and Associates had ever produced. Instead of polished stock photography and confident messaging, we created a series of authentic stories about people navigating financial decisions with uncertainty and curiosity. Real customers sharing real experiences with learning about banking, investing, and financial planning. Each story acknowledged that financial decisions were complicated and sometimes confusing, but positioned Meridian Bank as a partner in figuring things out rather than an expert talking down to ignorant consumers. The messaging was warm, accessible, and refreshingly honest about the challenges of managing money in a complex economy. When we presented the campaign to Meridian's executive team, the response was immediate and overwhelming. They didn't just approve the concept, they expanded it. They wanted to roll out the uncertainty-based approach across all their marketing channels. They wanted to train their customer service team to use the same acknowledging language. They wanted to redesign their website to reflect the same welcoming philosophy. Most importantly, they wanted Morrison & Associates to apply the same research-based approach to other aspects of their business strategy. It was the kind of client response that agencies dream about: complete buy-in, expanded scope, and a request for deeper strategic partnership. The project that was supposed to demonstrate my pathetic amateur thinking had become the foundation for Morrison & Associates' largest client engagement in 3 years. Victoria's reaction was predictable and fascinating to watch. She couldn't criticize the campaign's success, the client results were too obvious to dismiss. But she also couldn't bring herself to acknowledge that the pathetic approach she'd been ridiculing for months had delivered the agency's biggest win of the year. Instead, she began taking credit for the strategic framework while simultaneously minimizing my contribution to its development. In team meetings, she referred to the Meridian campaign as our research-based approach to financial services marketing. In client calls, she positioned herself as the strategic mastermind who had guided the project from concept to execution. In agency newsletters, she described the campaign as an example of Morrison & Associates' innovative thinking, with my name buried in the project team credits. But Jessica Martinez wasn't fooled. During our regular check-in calls, she made it clear that she understood exactly who had developed the strategic thinking behind the campaign's success. She also made it clear that Meridian Bank's continued partnership with Morrison & Associates was contingent on my continued involvement in their marketing strategy. "We're not just buying creative services," Jessica told Victoria during one particularly tense three-way call. "We're buying Jackson's research methodology and strategic framework. If that changes, we'll need to reconsider our agency relationship." For the first time since I'd known her, Victoria Blackwood was in a position where she needed me more than I needed her. The pathetic employee she'd been tormenting for 2 years had become the foundation of the agency's most important client relationship. The power dynamic shift was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria still criticized my work, but with less venom and more caution. She still called me pathetic, but less frequently and never in front of clients. She still assigned me menial tasks, but always with the understanding that I might redirect my attention to more valuable projects if she pushed too hard. It was during this delicate period of recalibrated workplace politics that David Holloway called with an offer I couldn't ignore. "Jackson, I've been following the Meridian Bank campaign through industry publications, and I'm impressed," he said during our scheduled phone call. "But more than that, I've been watching how you've positioned yourself strategically within Morrison & Associates. You've built leverage without burning bridges. You've demonstrated value without demanding recognition. You've played a very sophisticated long game." I had never thought of my approach as strategic positioning, but David was right. By building success outside Victoria's view and then allowing her to take partial credit for the results, I'd created a situation where she needed my skills but couldn't eliminate my presence. "Here's what I'm thinking," David continued. "Pinnacle Media Group is about to land the biggest financial services account in our history. 3 times larger than Meridian Bank. The client specifically requested an agency with research-based consumer psychology expertise. They want the kind of strategic thinking you've been developing." He paused, letting the implications settle. "The creative director position is still available, but I want to offer you something bigger. Senior creative director, with a team of 12 strategists and researchers reporting to you. Full autonomy over strategic methodology, equity participation, and the chance to build the kind of research-based creative department that could reshape how agencies approach consumer psychology." The offer was everything I'd been working toward without realizing it. Not just a job, but the opportunity to prove that pathetic academic theories could revolutionize practical advertising. The chance to build an environment where strategic thinking was valued over office politics. A place where calling someone's work pathetic would be seen as a failure of leadership rather than effective management. But there was one more thing I needed to do before I could accept David's offer. I needed Victoria to understand what she'd lost. The opportunity came 2 weeks later, during Morrison & Associates' quarterly strategy review. Every department head was required to present their team's achievements and outline their strategic priorities for the coming quarter. Victoria had been preparing for weeks, building a presentation that positioned the creative department's success around her leadership and vision. The conference room was packed with agency leadership, department heads, and senior strategists. Victoria stood at the front of the room in her signature armor, confident in her ability to command attention and claim credit for the Meridian Bank's success. Her presentation was polished and professional, full of charts showing improved client retention and expanded project scope. She talked about innovative strategic frameworks and research-based consumer insights as if she'd personally developed both concepts. She described the creative department's evolution toward more sophisticated strategic thinking without once mentioning the person who had actually driven that evolution. When she finished presenting, the room buzzed with impressed murmurs and congratulatory comments. Victoria had successfully positioned herself as the visionary leader who had transformed Morrison & Associates' approach to creative strategy. Then Bradley Morrison, the founder's nephew, asked the question that changed everything. Victoria, this research-based approach is impressive, but I'm curious about scalability. Do we have the internal expertise to apply this methodology to other clients, or was the Meridian success dependent on specific circumstances? Victoria's confident smile flickered for just a moment. She'd been so focused on taking credit for the success that she hadn't prepared to explain how it could be replicated. Of course we can scale this approach, she said, recovering quickly. The strategic framework is sound and the research methodology is reproducible. We just need to apply the same rigorous thinking to other client challenges. Great, Bradley continued. Because we've just been approached by Covenant Insurance about a similar research-based campaign targeting millennial customers. They specifically requested the team that worked on the Meridian project. When can you start developing strategic recommendations? I watched Victoria's face as she realized the trap she'd built for herself. By claiming credit for the research-based approach, she'd also claimed responsibility for delivering similar results. But she didn't understand the methodology well enough to replicate it. She'd been so busy dismissing my work as pathetic that she'd never actually learned how it worked. I'll need to review our team capacity and resource allocation, she said carefully. This type of strategic development requires significant research and analysis. Actually, I said, speaking for the first time during the meeting, I've already done preliminary research on insurance marketing psychology. The patterns are similar to banking anxiety, but with different demographic triggers. I could have strategic recommendations ready within 2 weeks. The room turned to look at me. Victoria's expression cycled through surprise, anger, and something that might have been fear. Jackson has been instrumental in developing our research-based approach, she said, emphasizing instrumental in a way that suggested I was a useful tool rather than a strategic thinker. Of course, he'll continue supporting these projects under appropriate supervision. But Bradley Morrison was looking at me with new interest. Jackson, you've been leading the research methodology development? Before Victoria could answer for me, I made a decision that would end my career at Morrison & Associates and begin something much more important. Actually, Bradley, I developed the entire strategic framework independently. The research methodology, the consumer psychology insights, the campaign development process, all of it came from work I've been doing outside the agency for the past 2 years. The room went completely silent. Victoria's face was drained of color. I've been applying these strategies to over a dozen clients in the Chicago market, I continued. Financial services, retail, healthcare, technology. The results have been consistent. Research-based consumer psychology delivers better customer acquisition and retention than traditional demographic targeting. I pulled out my phone and opened the portfolio I'd been building in secret. I've documented case studies, performance metrics, and strategic frameworks for each project. The Meridian Bank success wasn't a one-time achievement. It was proof of concept for an approach that works across industries. Bradley leaned forward. You've been working with other clients? Pro bono and freelance projects, I clarified. Nothing that conflicted with Morrison & Associates accounts. But yes, I've been testing and refining this approach for 2 years. Victoria finally found her voice. Jackson, this is highly inappropriate. Discussing outside projects during a company meeting is exactly what we should be discussing. Bradley interrupted. Jackson, I'd like to see this portfolio. If you've developed proprietary strategic methodology, we need to understand how it fits with our agency capabilities. After the meeting, I was invited to Bradley's office for a private conversation that lasted 3 hours. I walked him through every case study, every research insight, every strategic framework I'd developed while enduring Victoria's daily humiliations. I showed him academic publications, client testimonials, and performance data that demonstrated the commercial value of research-based creative strategy. By the end of our conversation, Bradley Morrison understood 2 things. His agency had been sitting on a strategic goldmine for 2 years, and the person who developed it had been systematically undervalued and mistreated by his creative director. Jackson, he said finally, I owe you an apology. We should have recognized your contributions much earlier. We should have supported your strategic development instead of letting it happen in isolation. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm prepared to offer you Victoria's position as creative director, effective immediately. Full autonomy over strategic methodology, budget authority for research projects, and the resources to build the kind of team that can properly support this approach. It was the offer I'd been working toward without realizing it. Victoria's job, her corner office, her salary, her authority. Everything she'd been using to make my life miserable, handed to me as recognition for the work she'd been calling pathetic, but I had already made my decision. Bradley, I appreciate the offer more than you know. But I've already accepted a position as senior creative director at Pinnacle Media Group. I'll be leaving Morrison and Associates at the end of the month. His face fell. Jackson, we can match any offer. We can exceed any offer. You've built something valuable here, and we want to support its growth. The offer isn't just about money, I said. It's about the opportunity to build something from the ground up, with full institutional support from day one. Pinnacle is creating an entire department around research-based creative strategy. They want to make this approach central to their agency identity. I stood to leave, then turned back. But there's something else, Bradley. For 2 years, Victoria has called my work pathetic on a daily basis. She's dismissed my ideas, undermined my confidence, and created a hostile work environment. That made me question my own abilities. The strategic framework that's now valuable to Morrison and Associates was developed despite her leadership, not because of it. Bradley nodded grimly. I understand. And I want you to know that Victoria's management style will be addressed immediately. 2 weeks later, Victoria Blackwood was asked to resign from Morrison and Associates. The official reason was strategic differences regarding department leadership and client development. The unofficial reason was that Bradley Morrison had spent those 2 weeks investigating Victoria's treatment of junior staff and discovering a pattern of behavior that exposed the agency to significant legal liability, but more than that, Victoria's departure was necessary because she'd revealed a fundamental flaw in her leadership. She'd been so focused on maintaining authority that she'd failed to recognize and develop talent. She'd been so committed to proving her superiority that she'd driven away the person whose innovations could have secured her dream job, because here's what Victoria never understood. Pinnacle Media Group had been watching Morrison and Associates for months, evaluating their strategic capabilities for a potential acquisition. My research-based campaigns had caught their attention, but Victoria's treatment of innovative thinking had convinced them that Morrison and Associates wasn't ready for. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.